He knew the general was wrong. He was holding the proof in his own hands. And he said nothing. Not because he was a coward. This was a man who had survived 3 years of the worst fighting on earth. He said nothing because in his army, telling a superior he was wrong, out loud, in front of other officers, was a way to end a career, sometimes a life. So he swallowed the truth, and he let the mistake stand. And that silence, repeated 1,000 times in 1,000 rooms, all the way up to the top, would help lose Germany the war. Now, hold that man in your mind. Because on the other side of the front, in the American Army, a 22-year-old, the lowest-ranking man in the room, was about to do the exact opposite. He was about to tell one of the most feared generals his country had that he was wrong in front of his entire staff. And the next morning, instead of being buried, he'd be promoted. 2 armies. The same moment. The opposite outcome. And the gap between those 2 reactions decided more battles than any tank ever did. This is not a story about steel or numbers or firepower. It's about a single invisible rule. A rule about who is allowed to be right out loud and how that one difference between the Americans and the Germans quietly won the war. Because here's the thing that should stop you. Man for man, the German soldier may have been the finest in the world. So why did an army that skilled, that disciplined, keep walking into catastrophes it could see coming? What was the flaw that no amount of courage or training could fix? And why could the Americans fix it with nothing more than a raised hand and 2 honest words? To answer that, you first have to give the German army its due, because the lazy version of this story, the one where the Germans were bumbling fools, is a lie that gets you killed. The truth is that the German army of the Second World War was, in many ways, the most effective fighting force on the planet. Its soldiers were superbly trained. Its junior officers were taught at the tactical level to think for themselves, handed a goal, and trusted to figure out how to reach it. This was a real strength, and it made German units terrifyingly good in a firefight. For years, they inflicted losses far out of proportion to their numbers. Anyone who tells you the Germans lost because they were stupid has never looked closely at how they fought. But there was a poison in the system, and it did not live at the bottom. It lived at the very top. Because above the brilliant sergeants and the sharp young officers sat a command structure built around one man. And that man did not want to hear the truth. He wanted to hear that he was right. Adolf Hitler had convinced himself that his own will could bend reality, that generals who spoke of retreat or shortage or impossibility were simply weak. And in an army where the supreme commander punished bad news, a terrible logic took hold, working its way down through every headquarters. Telling a superior something he did not want to hear became dangerous. So people stopped doing it. The generals learned to manage the Führer's moods instead of managing the war. And accurate information, the single most valuable thing any army possesses, began to die on its way up the chain. Hold on to that image of information dying in transit, because it's about to cost the German army the most important day of the war. Consider what happened on the 6th of June, 1944. The Allies were coming ashore in Normandy, and the German army had, sitting in reserve, the armored divisions that might have thrown them back into the sea if they moved fast in the first hours before the beachhead hardened. Every professional instinct in the German command knew those tanks needed to move, and they sat still. Why? Because the reserves could not be released without authorization from the top. And at the top, no one dared act. The orders had to travel up to Hitler's headquarters, where the Führer was asleep, and where his staff was too frightened of his temper to wake him. Imagine that. The fate of the Western Front hanging in the balance, and the men whose job was to manage it choosing to let their leader sleep rather than risk his anger. The panzers waited. The hours that could have decided everything bled away. By the time the orders finally came, it was too late, and the Allied grip on the beaches was already set. The German army did not lose those hours to a lack of tanks or a lack of courage. It lost them to a lack of anyone willing to speak up. Bring it down, for a moment, to a single room on that night, because the whole disease of the German command fits inside it. It is the early hours of the 6th of June. At the Führer's mountain retreat, staff officers are receiving the first fragmentary reports of landings in Normandy. Some of them suspect this is the real thing. The armored reserves that could answer it are only a phone call and a signature away. But that signature has to come from one man, and that man is asleep. And he has left orders that he is not to be disturbed. Picture the AED standing in the corridor with the reports in his hand, doing the math that the entire rotten system had taught him to do. On one side of the scale, the possibility that this is the invasion, and that every minute of delay hands the enemy the beachhead. On the other side, the certainty of the Führer's rage if he is woken for something that turns out to be a false alarm. A soldier in a healthier army would not even hesitate. You wake the man, you take the heat, you move the tanks. But this was not a healthy army. So the aide weighed his leader's temper against the fate of the Western Front, and he chose the temper. He let him sleep. The reports sat on a table. The panzers sat in their fields. And the most important hours of the campaign in the West drained away because a frightened man in a hallway decided that the safest thing he could do was nothing at all. That is what fear does to an army from the inside. It does not announce itself with a great defeat. It shows up as a hesitation in a hallway, a softened report, a truth left unspoken because speaking it felt more dangerous than losing the battle. Multiply that single hallway by every headquarters in the German war machine, over 6 years of war, and you begin to see the real shape of the thing that beat them. It was not only the Russian winter, or the American factories, or the weight of the whole world turning against them. It was also this, an army that had made honesty hazardous, and then wondered why it kept marching blind. Now, zoom out, because Normandy was not a fluke. It was the rule. Go back to the winter before, to the frozen ruins of a city on the Volga called Stalingrad. An entire German army was being surrounded there, and the professional soldiers on the ground could see it happening. They knew what needed to happen. Break out west while there was still time before the ring closed. But breaking out meant retreat, and retreat was a word the Führer had forbidden. To press the point, to keep telling him the truth after he had made his wishes clear, was to invite disgrace. And so the truth got softened, delayed, filtered, managed, until the moment to escape had passed, and an entire army was swallowed whole. Hundreds of thousands of men, lost in part because the machine that was supposed to carry hard facts to the top had been trained, instead, to carry comfortable ones. This is the yes man problem, and it is one of the deadliest diseases an army can catch. When the man at the top rewards agreement and punishes bad news, he slowly blinds himself. He surrounds himself with people who tell him what he wants to hear, and he loses the ability to see the battlefield as it actually is. The German High Command, for all its brilliance, had caught this disease at the source, and it was terminal. But the most chilling proof of it was still to come, and it came with a rope. In the summer of 1944, a group of German officers, men who could see that the war was lost and the country being destroyed, tried to remove Hitler and end it. The plot failed, and the response revealed exactly what kind of machine the German command had become. The retribution was savage and total. Thousands were arrested. Many were executed in ways designed to terrorize everyone watching. One of the most respected field marshals in the entire army, a man whose name the Allies themselves spoke with respect, was quietly forced to take his own life, his death disguised as a hero's passing to spare the regime embarrassment. The message to every officer in Germany was carved in blood. Disagreement is death. Say what you are told to say. Stay silent and stay alive. An army cannot think clearly when its thinkers are afraid to open their mouths. Now cross the line and look at how the other side ran things, because this is where the story turns, and where the quiet American advantage finally comes into view. The American army was not a gentle place, and it was not free of ego or politics. But it was built on a fundamentally different assumption about information, the assumption that being right mattered more than being senior. In an American command post, a junior officer who spotted an error was, more often than not, expected to say so. Commanders wanted the accurate map, not the flattering one. The whole system was designed, imperfectly but genuinely, to let hard facts travel upward without dying on the way. And when American leaders failed, the American army did something the German system could barely manage. It admitted the failure, and it fixed it fast. Early in the war, in the mountains of North Africa, American troops took a brutal beating at a pass called Kasserine, humiliated by a more experienced enemy. It was exactly the kind of disaster that confirmed every German sneer about amateur Americans. But watch what happened next. The Americans did not bury the failure or shoot the messenger. They studied it coldly, relieved the commander who had failed, and put a harder, sharper general in his place. Within months, the same army that had been humiliated was winning. The system had a way to say, "This isn't working," and to be heard. That is the difference the whole story has been building toward. It was never really about which soldier was braver or which tank was thicker. It was about which army could tell itself the truth. One side had built a machine where accurate information flowed up and failure got corrected. The other had built a machine where accurate information got you silenced and failure got repeated because no one dared name it. And here is the part that should land hardest. The German officers who survived the war understood this perfectly, once it was over and they were finally free to speak. In interview after interview, in memoir after memoir, they returned to the same theme with something close to grief. How often they had known the right course and not been able to act on it. How the orders from above defied the reality in front of them. How the machine they served had, in the end, refused to hear them. They had not been outfought at the level of skill. They had been strangled by a command culture that treated the truth as a threat. Go all the way back, now, to those two men we started with. The German officer, holding the proof of his general's mistake, choosing silence because in his world, silence was survival. And the American corporal, the lowest man in the room, choosing to raise his hand and say the map is wrong, and walking out the next day with a new stripe on his arm. Neither of those moments involved a single shot. Neither would ever appear on a casualty list or a battle map. But between them lies one of the deepest reasons the war ended the way it did. The Germans built the finest soldiers of their age and then wrapped them in a command that could not bear to be corrected. The Americans built an army that was willing to be told, by anyone at any rank, that it was wrong. In the end, the deadliest weapon the United States carried into that war was not a rifle or a tank or a bomb. It was permission. Permission to be right out loud, and the simple, revolutionary willingness to listen.